Welcome back, horror fans, cinephiles, and giallo enthusiasts. It is I, Tanner Leeser, your host for The King in Giallo. This is episode 16 of the Forgotten Giallo film series, 1970 Part 3, and I've got 3 gialli here I'd like to highlight. As always, thanks in no small part to Troy Howarth's book on giallo cinema, So Deadly, So Perverse, 50 Years of Italian Giallo Films, Volume 1, 1963 to 1973. Like this video and subscribe to The King in Giallo. Click the notification bell icon so YouTube doesn't hide my new content from you. If you enjoy what I do here, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. On to the video. The 8th Giallo of 1970 and perhaps one of the most truly unique Giallo of all time, one I may have to cover in greater detail in the future, and I'm not 100% that it is the only, but it certainly is the first Giallo spaghetti western hybrid. Ringo, It's Massacre Time, also called The Revenge of Ringo and Wanted Ringo. The film is an Italian production. It is written and directed by Mario Pinzauti, billed as Peter Launders. The music is by Felice Di Stefano. The cast consists of Jean-Louis as Ringo, Mickey Hargitay as Mike Wood, Lucia Bomez, billed as Lucy Bomez, as Pilar, Giovanni Ivan Scratuglia as Sheriff Sam Carroll, and Omero Gargano as Don Alonso. The plot follows Ringo and Sheriff Sam Carroll as they join forces and arrive in a Mexican village to search for Mike Wood, Ringo's missing brother. Amidst this investigation, a killer is on the loose who is administering deadly poison to their victims, causing the sheriff to conduct a separate inquiry. Film buffs and historians will be able to recognize the early trappings of the giallo creeping its way into spaghetti westerns as early as the mid-60s. In For a Few Dollars More, 1965 by Sergio Leone, the narrative introduces flashbacks which harken back to a traumatic memory. Giallo didn't invent this, but they certainly overused this within their tellings. In Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, also Leone, the flashbacks return and are tied to the mysterious rivalry between the characters of Harmonica and Frank. This comparison is aided by the fact that Giallo trendsetter Dario Argento co-wrote the story outline, and if you watch his 80s Giallo Tenebrae, I believe you can see strong similarities to the unraveling of the mystery through the usage of flashbacks with this western. Moving on, a case can be made likewise for the thriller elements found in Killer Goodbye, 1968 by Primo Zeglio, as well as in The Moment to Kill, also 1968 by Giuliano Carnemeo. These elemental intrusions of thriller subgenres would grow from a trickling in to a greater torrent as the spaghetti westerns would begin to run out of steam in the 1970s and be outpaced entirely by the rising Italian genres of giallo and polizieschi. This film is the first hybridization of the spaghetti western and giallo genres, but would remain forgotten for a long time, chiefly because it isn't worth remembering on those merits alone. Unfortunately, the film ebbs through different set pieces and never fully commits to being a giallo or a spaghetti western. The attempt could best be described as half-hearted at best. The story behind the film's production is admittedly more interesting and engaging than the film's plot itself. Shooting started in 1966, but the production had to be halted when the lead actor, Mickey Hargitay, up and left the project to attend to family matters, prompting the producers to sue him. The director was forced to sit on the material for several years before he could acquire the money to continue production, and when he finally did, the lead actor had already long since moved on. Jean-Louis was recast as the lead, and the script was modified to include both characters. This is how the film resulted in having 2 stars in the picture who curiously were both acting in their own separate vehicles, but were woven together with a bit of movie magic. The characters never see each other on screen for these obvious reasons, but this factoid certainly adds a lens to go into the film with. The film will remain forgotten for a long time likely, and this could perhaps be attributed to lack of experience on the part of the director. Pinzauti fumbles the parts he should be focusing on, and even introduces extra elements he should have just left out. You want to see witches? Well, this movie has witches too. It becomes apparent that Pinzauti threw every popular trope for Italian cinema at the time into this film without understanding why or how these separate parts end up working well to begin with. This film also has absolutely nothing to do with the Ringo series of spaghetti westerns, which was popularized around this time thanks to its director, Duccio Tessari, and lead, Giuliano Gemma. The films of Ringo, Django, and Sartana would all share a similar fate of having producers attempt to cash in instant success for the lesser films by trying to trick audiences into believing that these newer movies were continuations of the adventures of these same-name characters. Occasionally, there were good flicks, but mostly not. Director Mario Pinzauti was born in 1930 in Rome. He began as a screenwriter in the 1960s. The trouble with this film's production might have affected his potential to get more work, but he would go on to direct a few more spaghetti westerns: Black Emanuela and White Emanuela, 1976, and Mandinga, 1976, which was both a knockoff of Mandingo and was originally slated to be made by Jess Franco. Pinzauti would retire in the 70s. The ninth giallo of 1970 is Il tuo dolce corpo da uccidere, an Italian and Spanish co-production. The film translates roughly to A Suitcase for a Corpse and is sometimes titled Your Sweet Body to Kill for unofficial English versions. It is directed by Alfonso Brescia and written by Antonio Fos, with the music by Coro Savina. The cast is played by Giorgio Ardisson as Clive Ardlington, Francois Prévost as Diana Ardlington, Eduardo Fajardo as Franz Adler, and Orquídea de Santos as Elena Sanders. The plot follows Clive, who is unhappily married to Diana. Clive adores his exotic fish and spends his time fantasizing about killing his wife. The arrival of an anonymous letter enlightens him to the fact that his wife is having an affair with his friend Franz, and after a bit of blackmail, Clive coerces Franz into finally getting rid of his wife for him, by way of murder. But Clive ends up losing a suitcase with evidence inside that could easily incriminate him. He must do everything he can to find it. This film is one of these sardonic thrillers which operates on pure cynicism, not too unlike Hatchet for the Honeymoon, 1970 by Mario Bava. The film opens with what is revealed soon enough to be a daydreamed murder sequence. The movie could be comparatively said to embody much of the themes of the aforementioned Bava Giallo, minus the supernatural elements found in that film. The acting in this film is top-notch, even in regards to the one-dimensional female stereotype, who is written predominantly to represent a fantasy of misogyny. The shift of settings from Britain to Spain is well utilized and visually effective. The fantasies are handled with the perfect balance of morbidity and hilarity. As a whole, the production looks and sounds great, and pieces of the film's score by Carlo Savina would be replicated in Bava's later horror film, Lisa and the Devil, 1972. Director Alfonso Brescia was born in 1930 in Rome. In the late 1950s, he started as an assistant director before debuting as a director in 1964. Oftentimes, he would be billed as Al Bradley, and he dabbled a bit in most of the popular genre flicks of the time: The Magnificent Gladiator, 1964, a Pipla; The Cult Is My Law, 1966, a spaghetti western; Kill Rommel, 1969, a war film; War of the Planets, 1977, a sci-fi; and Big Mama, 1979, a hybrid polizieschi sceneggiati. He may best be known for The Beast in Space, 1980, a pornographic knockoff of the Hollywood blockbuster film Alien, 1979. On the whole, Brescia never truly broke out as one considered to be a significant filmmaker, and this giallo is by no means great, but it is competently directed and demonstrates an attention to detail and understanding of what it is going for, which so many of these forgotten giallo films are so readily lacking. He would make two more giallo films: Naked Girl Killed in the Park, 1972, and a very late giallo, Murder in Blue Light, 1991. He passed away in 2001. The third giallo of this video, 10th and final giallo for 1970, is The Weekend Murders, an Italian production. The film is directed by Michele Lupo, written by Sergio Donati, Massimo Felisati, and Fabio Pittoru. and the music for the film is by Francesco De Masi. The cast of the film is Gastone Moschin as Sergeant Aloysius Thorpe, Anna Moffo as Barbara Worth, Ida Galli as Isabella Carter, Peter Baldwin as Anthony Carter, Giacomo Rossi Stewart as Ted Collins, Lance Percival as Superintendent Gray, Christopher Chittle as Georgie Kemple, Beryl Cunningham as Pauline Collins, Orchidia DeSantis as the maid Evelyn, and Ballard Berkeley as the butler Peter. The plot follows a group of avaricious heirs who gather at a British estate to hear the reading of a will, but lose their minds when they discover that most of them have been cut out of the inheritance they expected to be receiving. Murders begin, and the superintendent of Scotland Yard and the local police sergeant arrive to get to the bottom of all this. The Weekend Murders is very much a transposition of an Agatha Christie type story, but Italian style. The style and execution of the film adds to this comparison by incorporating the English setting, having a stereotypically dry British humor, and requiring the viewers to pay close attention if they want to see all the well-hidden breadcrumbs. The trade-off for this particular giallo is that rather than having an abundance of sex and violence, it rather has a well-constructed script, well-written characters, and contains a wonderfully endearing investigator duo. The film overall works very well in terms of both its production and its cast. Gastone Moschin was born in 1929 and would go on to appear in two of the most highly rated polizieschi films, Caliber 9, 1972 by Fernando De Leo, and Emergency Squad, 1974 by Stelvio Massi. He is best known, however, for appearing in The Conformist, 1970 by Bernardo Bertolucci, and The Godfather Part 2, 1974 by Francis Ford Coppola. Lance Percival is a British comic actor who appeared in comedies such as Carry On Cruising, 1962, and Up Pompeii, 1971. Plus, he was involved in The Beatles television series, 1965 to 1969, as well as Yellow Submarine, 1968. He headlined his own series called Lance at Large, 1965 to 1966, and he wrote for a British show called Whodunit, 1972 to 1978. Other British actors in the film include the butler, played by Ballard Berkeley, who was famously in Fawlty Towers, 1975. Giallo veterans include the American actor-director Peter Baldwin, who mentions that he was brought on by Lupo to assist in directing the British actors, but Baldwin ended up leaving this duty to Lupo because this task made it too difficult for him to focus on his own role. Other veterans include Italian actors Ida Galli, billed as Evelyn Stewart, and Giacomo Rossi Stewart. Some fans might not enjoy the tonal difference of this giallo being on the lighter side and being something of a romp. Others might find a lot to love here. Fun fact, The Weekend Murders was paired on double bills with The Black Belly of the Tarantula by MGM distributors when it arrived in the US. I hope you learned something new here, and if you are interested in watching these movies, go ahead and look them up online. If you do watch them or you've already seen them, I invite you to leave your thoughts on them in the comments. Follow The King in Giallo on Instagram and give a like to The King in Giallo on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube if you aren't already, and join me every week for new Giallo film content. Join The King in Giallo on Patreon for both early access and exclusive content. Farewell to 1970 and welcome to 1971. Upcoming content on The King in Giallo will be the overview, review, and giallitally for the first giallo from Sergio Martino, 1971's The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, starring Edwidge Fenech in her first starring role, along with George Hilton, Ivan Rasimov, and Alberto de Mendoza. Thank you very much for your continued support. This is Tanner Leeser for The King in Giallo, and if nothing else, I'll see you next time.
This is the first time I've seen you looking really worried about something. Tell me, Ringo, please. I guess there are just too many things I don't understand.
But at least